Israel, the Palestinians, the Arabs, world hostility towards Israel. What do we make of it all, brothers and sisters? Some have thought that the Arabs would overrun Israel. That was a prominent view during the 1970s and the 1980s. Time has shown us that that idea was false. All the Arab-Israeli wars have shown us that this is not going to happen. 1948, 1956, 1967, 1973, and so it never took place, did it? And so today the Arab nations are hopelessly divided and even hostile to each other. There is virtually no chance of them unifying forces to destroy Israel today. The Arab opposition to Israel has failed on the battlefield. So Israel occupies the land she does today in fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Brothers and sisters, we must recognize the truth. The first stage of restoration before Armageddon is now virtually complete. The physical nation is there, on the map, with its Hebrew language and on political principles. Bible prophecy is vindicated, and our faith in it is justified. So, what comes next? We have to recognize, brothers and sisters, and I'm sure those of us in this room do recognize, that the hand of God has been at work in the process of regathering the Jewish people and in establishing the nation as a political reality in this world. We see the miracle of Israel. This is God's work. It is part of his purpose, and that purpose is the redemption of his people. The development of this partial and primary restoration has taken over a century now, and it's not all for naught. It's not happened for nothing, brothers and sisters. But what we see today is, as the recent elections in Israel have shown us, we have seen a divided nation. We do see a divided nation. You have the left socialist wing part of the country. You also have on the right those with a religious and sometimes even biblical flavour. Here is the question being asked by many Israelis today. Is it to be a secular state, or is it to be a theocracy? This is the real issue behind the recent elections in Israel, when you really plummet and investigate them. It's a question that we must ask, brothers and sisters. How do we view Israel as Christadelphians? Do we see it as a secular state like any other? Or do we see it as the nucleus of the kingdom? The raw materials, as it were, prepared for the building up of the nation in Christ. We must beware, brothers and sisters, of allowing ourselves to be misled on this question. You know, back in 1948, the Vatican produced this statement. This is what the view of the state was. May the 14th, 1948. Modern Zionism is not the true heir of biblical Israel, but a secular state. Therefore, the Holy Land and its sacred sites belong to Christianity, which they mean Catholicism, of course, the true Israel. Now, there was an element of truth in that statement, because, as we know, Israel came into being as a result of the November 1947 UN resolution, which partitioned Palestine between Jews and Arabs. So there was an element of truth in that statement, but we have to be careful as to how far we buy into that Vatican description, because there was a little bit more to it than that. There was a bit more to it in the declaration of the state. Ben-Gurion's declaration said this: "Accordingly, we, members of the People's Council, representatives of the Jewish community in Eretz Israel and of the Zionist movement, hereby declare the establishment of," he uses the term, "a Jewish state in Eretz Israel, to be known as the State of Israel. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisaged by the prophets of Israel." That statement contradicts the Vatican statement, which distanced biblical Israel from the new state. This is the issue that Israel has to confront, and it is the issue that we need to consider, brothers and sisters. Now, the world, of course, adopts the Vatican view, and yet it knows what the prophets of Israel said. The world knows what the prophets of Israel envisaged. It's well known, brothers and sisters. There's books, you can go to reference libraries and dig them out to this day, in this country especially so. You can find these books that talk about Israel's restoration, the kingdom, and so on. It's well known. And just occasionally, you know, there are world news people, media, who come close to acknowledging it publicly. This happened back in the time of the 6 Days War in 1967, when this cartoon appeared in the Scottish Daily Express. The cartoon appeared on May the 29th, 1967, and it was a week later that the Israeli Air Force went into action, Monday morning, June 5th, 1967. And you see the sense of it. The cartoon shows the Arab forces of Egypt at that time about to attack Israel. And the caption underneath says, "It's too risky, President Nasser. Maybe the Israelis are being supported by a force even more powerful than the Americans." And so it is, brothers and sisters, there was a recognition by some Jewish people, tongue-in-cheek it may have been for some of them, but there was a recognition by some Jewish people as well. There was a broadcaster that I visited once in Israel, and I spoke to him about this, with this business, and I spoke to him about Israel's pride after the 6 Days War, when they were rather heady about what had happened and full of their own achievements and so on and so forth. So I spoke to him. His name was Tovia Singer. He was a broadcaster at the time, and this is just a clip of what he had to say. In 1967, and just after 1967, we detect in Israel an attitude of what I'll call self-confidence, perhaps overconfidence to some extent. This seems to have been dinted somewhat in 1973, and you've got the present situation, which is, well, it was described to us by one security official there as being tense. That kind of situation which is there today is having an effect upon society. You've spoken in your program on Israel National Radio about a transformation taking place. Could you expand a little bit on that for us?
It's difficult for someone who was not following the news at the time of what had occurred in just the first 15 hours of the 67 war. In less than a couple of hours, 400 Arab planes were destroyed. virtually all of the air forces that surround of the Arab world that was set to destroy the Jewish state were destroyed. Its runways were destroyed. In just moments, the Sinai campaign had exploded, and by the end of the sixth day of the war, Israel had liberated the Golan Heights, which Syria used. It was in the history, in the annals of human history, there has never been known warfare with such a miraculous victory as had happened in '67.
Right.
Jewish people were able to pray. In fact, we Yom Yerushalayim, people were able to pray at the Western Wall, never before. Soldiers cried there. Yeah. But of course, the great danger that we see in Scripture is that when God gives us a gift, because no one could explain '67. You could say Jews are smart, sharp, they're great warriors. It can't be explained. Yeah. But what happened? There were great parades through Jerusalem. Koichem v'oitzim yodi, they said. You know why we succeeded? It was the power and the strength of my hand. Jews started speaking about, you know what? Israel has the greatest jet fighters in the world. We have the greatest man for man. You heard this talk of and there was great pride. And the pride means that there was a failure in that test. Because the test for us is, can we recognize that the success that we have comes from the Almighty and it's not from us? Could anyone explain that the state of Israel, a people emerged from the ashes of the Holocaust to emerge and build a state surrounded by 22 Arab countries who seek each and every day to destroy it? So what occurred was, naturally, when this pride occurred, 73 was different. You know, when the Syrians and Egyptians attacked Israel simultaneously on October 6, 1973, it was a little before 2 o'clock. It was in the middle of Yom Kippur. That's right. It was our Day of Atonement. And naturally, many of the pious of the children of Israel said, woe unto us. You know, yes, the Syrians and Egyptians sought to use that for evil, but maybe God is telling us that we really didn't turn our hearts to God. And, you know, if you asked me, did Israel win the Yom Kippur War? Well, yes. But we don't say yes with exuberance. We say it with a heavy heart. Why? Because for many thousands of Israeli soldiers were lost. It took many, many days until we were able to turn the war around. And it really was Ariel Sharon, who is now Prime Minister, who the Almighty used as a remarkable vessel to win the Sinai campaign. It was horrible. There were only a couple of tanks waiting to meet the Syrians. It was miracles. And President Nixon, who for what his own reasons, he was not a Jew lover, he was not an Israel lover, and Kissinger, the Secretary of State, was not our friend, but because he felt that for whatever reason, he felt that Israel needed arms, the United States supplied it, no European country would allow American cargo planes to land. Tremendous things happened. But there was a rethinking in Israel. It showed us that, in fact, Israel can be harmed, and you have to remember this. You know, your viewers must understand that geographically, Israel can be destroyed in a war, God forbid. I mean, Israel is a country 26,000 square kilometers, smaller than the state of New Jersey. It's tiny. It geographically can be destroyed. But Israel has an enormous problem. That is, it cannot destroy its enemies, meaning that Israel has no ability to take over Egypt or to destroy Egypt. It can't destroy nearly 70 million people, the largest. It cannot take over Syria and destroy Syria. It can't. So there isn't an even playing field. There is always a sense that in any war, Israel could be lost, could be destroyed, God forbid, its inhabitants murdered, whereas Israel doesn't have the ability or the desire to take over Damascus. Right. And as a result of that, there has been a rethinking among the children of Israel that we must go into this with our eyes locked on heaven, and knowing that, yes, the Almighty has given us great warriors among the children of Israel, but that all comes from blessings. And it comes from above, not from below. It doesn't come from our muscles. It comes from a place called a promise. And that promise is contained in the book that you're holding, the Bible itself. And so humility became stronger after the 73 war.
That's an older clip, but I put it on just to show how that after 1973, there was, to use his words, there was a rethinking among the children of Israel. There was a change of attitude that took place at about that time. And so when we went to Israel after that period, we find signs like this on the mountains of Israel. This particular sign, I took a photograph of it. It was just on the road as you go up to Bethel, and the sign there was a literal sign on the mountains of Israel. We're often looking for signs of a different nature, but in this case, it was a literal sign that was there. And if we translate it, this is what it said. We have returned to our home. Here in Bethel, 3,800 years ago, the land of Israel had been promised to the people of Israel by the Creator of the world. By virtue of this promise, we are inhabitants today, Haifa, Tel Aviv, Shiloh, Hebron. And so in Israel, among some, there was an emerging measure of belief that started at this time, a belief in what the prophets had written. And so when you go to Israel today, brothers and sisters, you're beginning to see a movement towards what the prophet predicted in that passage that we read by way of introduction from Malachi. There we read, Malachi 4, verse 4, "Remember ye the law of Moses, my servant, which I commanded unto him in Horeb for all Israel, with the statutes and judgments. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord." And so there you see a poster which we took a photograph of. It was on a lamppost, and there were several of them around at that time. But you see what it's advertising? All-night learning. They were going to study the law of Moses. They were going to study the Torah all night. How many of us are prepared to sit up all night studying the scriptures? It was a turning back to the law of Moses. And that is what you are seeing today, brothers and sisters. It is happening amongst many in Israel today. And there's the evidence for it. Now, I know that some brethren don't accept that this is taking place. Well, they're wrong. It is taking place, brothers and sisters. Maybe slowly, maybe gradually, but it is taking place. Israel does not yet know their Messiah and Lord, as we sing in one of our hymns. They may not accept the BASF without reservation. They're not at that stage. But there is a religious movement there, a renewed respect for the Torah, for the law of Moses. And it's turning the people around. Look at this Jewish lady as she engages in earnest prayer. I didn't take this photograph, one of my granddaughters did, but it just depicts the intenseness of the prayer that this lady was engaged in, and you can see others in the background that are as well. And so it is that the apostle tells us that the law is a schoolmaster to bring us to Christ. Galatians chapter 3, verses 24 and 25, you'll know it well. The law is going to act as a schoolmaster to bring us to Christ. It had that work in the first century, and it has it again in our time. The law, as they turn back to the law, as Malachi says they are to do, it will gradually lead them to Christ. It has to do that. And so we see a change taking place in Israel, a spiritual change. This was the national Bible quiz in Israel. You can see the Prime Minister Netanyahu in the middle there. Now, what other nation, what other people has such a focus on the scriptures as that? Imagine Mr. Cameron engaging in a Bible quiz and congratulating the winners like that. Brothers and sisters, what kind of state do the Jewish people want? Where are they going? Well, is it going to be secular? Or is it going to be a Bible-based society? And that's what the fight is all about right now. That's what the trouble is all about. That is the question in the recent election. It's a question that many in Israel are asking today. And I discussed this question with a few people in Israel. There was one particular gentleman by the name of Daniel Luria, who is involved in buying up properties for Jews who want to live in Jerusalem. And I asked him about this, and this was about 2 years ago when I spoke to him, so events have moved on. But it'd be interesting. I thought you'd be interested to hear his take on it. He has quite a spiel to offer.
More Jewish.
Some have suggested that, haven't they? And
They have
in
suggested
certain areas,
yeah.
anyway.
Well, the areas where there are settlement blocks, where anywhere where there are Jews living, for sure should be under Jewish sovereignty. That's for sure. Yeah. I personally think that you have to annex the whole area, and whatever consequences are the consequences. We shouldn't be shooting ourselves in the foot and just handing more land away. As it is, we've got an enemy on our back doorstep.
To what extent is religious faith going to impact upon the people in power? And behind that, of course, the voters. Where are we going as far as that is? Is there a spiritual development taking place in the land of Israel today? Or are we in a quagmire? Are we stuck?
I don't think we're ever stuck. I think the messianic donkey, even though he may be slow from time to time, and he may take a breather, he's still moving forward. We are living in messianic times. Some would call it the footsteps of the Messiah. Some would call it the unfolding redemption process. We don't even see it sometimes. Sometimes we've taken a step back, it seems, with Gush Katif, where 10,000 lives were destroyed and cemeteries are pulled up and synagogues are destroyed. This is something which is incomprehensible, a tragedy for the Jewish people. Sometimes maybe we needed that in order to wake up. I think many in Israel woke up. For many it was, we told you so. As a result of that, we've got missiles landing in regular cities. Hopefully the same mistakes won't be made with Judea and Samaria. There is an awakening politically. I think many people are asking the questions, what is it that we really want here? What does it mean to be a Jewish state for Jewish people? Not just another multicultural democratic society. We are a Jewish state for Jewish people. And that means also Jewish values. What is it that we're here? What are we doing here? What have we come back to? So I think there was a time in history for the Zionism to unfold, and maybe even Zionism without religion, even though religious Zionists were always coming back. But now that we've built the physical state, now the other questions are being asked. Who are we as a people? Where are we going? What are the Jewish values that we want to live by? And there is a huge awakening. The religious, the tshuva movement, the repentance movement is huge in this country. We're seeing it with different groups that have gone to Eilat and Tel Aviv and Lod and Ramle, and areas that were the bastions, even kibbutzim today. I know of certain kibbutzim that were anti-religious, not just non-religious, but anti-religious, and today they're asking questions. Today they have some semblance of religious, celebrating religious festivals. In some kibbutzim, there's even synagogues being built. Who would have even considered that 30 or 40 years ago, or the foundation of the state? So at some point, once you build the house, you need to ask yourself, how do we want to feel the house?
So you're here. Now the question that is in my mind is, what does Hashem expect of you? Now he's given you the land, in fact he's given you the city. What does he expect of you?
I don't have a direct link to God.
Well, yes, you do. Through the Torah?
We are located in the holiest land in this world. This is the place where you feel the closest to God, that there is no question. We are at the center of the fire. What exactly he wants from us, I don't know. I can only tell you what he tells us via the Bible.
Exactly.
Now, via the Bible, things are very clear. We have to live in accordance to his law. If we live in accordance to his law and follow his path and walk in his ways, then we'll be okay. If not, then we can be thrown out. This land can spew us out, as the Bible says, if we don't live in accordance. We believe, of course, that we've now come back for the final time here. We were kicked out in previous times. We've now returned for the building of the final temple, which will be rebuilt by God, whether it be in some heavenly fashion, but that's in God's realm. Our job today is to return to godly ways, to be a moral people, to be a shining light for the world, and to be a shining light for ourselves. That involves many, many different things. I don't know what's more or less important. I can't say that keeping the Sabbath is more or less important than being a moral person, or not speaking gossip, or not murdering. There's a gamut of 613 laws there. It doesn't say after each law, this is worth X number of points. All we know is there is a path to follow. There are laws between man and God, and there are laws between man and man. We just now celebrated yesterday the festival of receiving the Bible.
Right.
That receiving the Bible is more than just a festival of agriculture. It was recognizing that because of God's blessings, we have fruits, we have vegetables, we have everything under the sun. We are seeing the trees grow once again. But it is more than that. It is acceptance of the Bible itself that was given on the 6th or the 7th of Sivan, in the early time of Sivan, thousands of years ago. If we are to keep this land, if we are to go along the redemption process, then we also have to recognize that we have to live like Jews. This has to be not just a Jewish state for Jewish people, but a Jewish state for Jewish people living according to a Jewish law. And that is the law that we've been given and that we've lived by for thousands of years, albeit in little ghettos and in various exiles. Today we're back in the land of Israel, and the last thing that we should be doing is trying to mimic the world. The last thing we should be doing is to be scared of the world, or to act in accordance with what the world dictates.
And isn't that probably a danger that we're seeing? That this government particularly, I don't know, I can't speak for the whole of the nation obviously, but they seem to be scared of what the world thinks. And the world is only advising you to do things which are suicidal.
There's no question that we do need true Jewish leaders who are ready to stand up to the world. We always hear in terms of, we don't know what it's like to be in that position. We're always hearing, but the pressure from America, the funds from America. I think at the end of the day, we have to know that we will survive no matter what. We're not here by the grace of the European Union or the world or the United Nations. We're here because we're part of some divine plan. We're here because of God's roadmap, and we should not under any circumstances bend and do what the world says. We have to do what is right for the Jewish people. We cannot rely on anyone. We saw that not so many years ago. The world wasn't that interested when 6 million Jews were being murdered and annihilated. The world didn't lift too much of a hand then. We can't rely on the world with regards to Iran. And we can't bend to the dictates of the world who don't appreciate that this is the Jewish homeland for the Jewish people. I couldn't care how much Arab pressure exists in the United Nations. I couldn't really care what the world says in many ways, because at the end of the day, we're going to be here in 100 years' time. You know, we've seen huge empires, magnificent empires, just like the United Nations, that have dictated to the Jewish world how we have to live. We saw the Assyrians, the Babylonians. We saw the Greek Empire that tried to impose that we should or shouldn't learn Bible. We saw the Roman Empire. We saw the Byzantines. We've seen the Muslim Empire. We've seen the Crusaders. We've seen non-stop empires following through to the Mamlukites and the Ottoman Empire and the British. All these empires are where today? You know, they're bylines in history books. We're the ones that are still here today against the odds. 3,800 years later, the Jewish people have returned to the land of Israel, and all these great empires no longer exist. So, yes, there may be pressure from America, United Nations, European League, or the Arab League, but in 100 years' time, 200 years' time, we're still going to be here. I don't know about the rest of these great empires that tried to dictate or to destroy the Jewish state. We're here to stay, and there's nothing the world can do about it. We just have to pray that we have leaders that appreciate that. And you know what? I have to tell you that I think that the world appreciates also strength of conviction. Yeah. I think if the Jewish leaders to stand up and say, this is the Jewish homeland, this is the Jewish people, we're not interested in giving it, the world would understand that. They would appreciate some type of, like I said, strength of conviction. When we have leaders like that, we're going to be okay. Whether today's leaders are those leaders, we'll see.
Okay, well, we've got really what we...
Especially the area surrounding the Temple Mount. Because one of the reasons I live here, because I see from my bedroom, from the kitchen, from whatever, I see the Temple Mount, like the holiest place in the world. And people ask me, would you want to move from here, change a place? I can't. You know, I just can't, because every place would be like going down in the low of the holiness, yeah? Because not everybody has the privilege to live from the holiest place. And meanwhile, I truly believe that we're going to have, you know, the third temple is going to be built. So meanwhile, I see different things. I see to the top and near the Seven Arch Hotel, you would see this eastern wall, okay? And now where the temple stood, you'll see the Dome of the Rock, okay? Yeah. This is how, when the temple will be built, this is how I'm going to see the temple directly from from my house, yeah? So this is
and
whatever.
Pilgrims will come from all over the world.
All over, yeah, for sure.
And it will be a house of prayer for all nations. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
All nations, yeah. Look, there are areas like me as a woman, there are areas in the temple that I'm not able to.
I understand, yeah.
Not allowed to go. For example, in the some areas I can. And not only me as a woman, also a man, if he's not a priest, he can't go in all the areas. So also different nations from all over there are areas in the temple itself they won't be able to go, but in the temple courtyard, so they're going to be able. And I'm sure that's the blessing for the whole world comes from the temple of peace, of prosperity, of everything.
How big will the temple be?
It's going to be different from today because the second temple, it was. I speak in meters. I don't know feet. Forget it. You're also Canada. Yeah, Canada's meters. Yeah, only. So the second temple, they say, was 250 meters over 250 meters. Okay, that was the size. And then Herod, during the second temple period, at the end, he expanded it. Yeah. But the third temple is going to be, instead of 250 meters, it's going to be 1,500 meters. Okay, much bigger. So it's going to be, I don't know how things are going to look. Is it going to expand maybe to the Mount of Olives, to the Old City? I don't know exactly, but it's going to be much longer.
Well, I've seen pictures of it by, what's that man's name now? Chaim
Richmond.
Yeah.
He was one of the rabbis that went last week. Yeah, okay, right. Chaim Richmond.
Yeah. Looking for the Messiah and for the rebuilding of the temple. This lady lives in East Jerusalem and right within sight of the Temple Mount. Her view isn't exactly probably Henry Sully's design, but there are those who are looking for the rebuilding of the temple. And so this is what you're seeing in there. The gentleman before that was very sure of his convictions and so on. But as you move through, you find these people. They're not everywhere. You have to seek them out and find those people. And like here is one of them, Harel Werber in Yoval Eli on the West Bank. But what he had to say to me was really quite interesting. I've put it on the screen so you can read it along. The Palestinian problem has a purpose, he says. It has caused the Israelis to ask the question, what are we doing here? There's the question again, you see. What is the reason for us being here? Every day I believe that the Moshiach will come. I do. And every day takes us a step closer to the coming of Moshiach, as all the prophets said a long time ago. I believe in it. It is true. And it is happening. You cannot ignore what has happened. The Jewish people were scattered for 2,000 years, and now they are coming back. Why? It didn't happen by itself. We have a lot of questions. We need new answers and higher understanding. But we need help. Isn't that incredible? A Jewish person on the West Bank, and what he's saying is, we see it to a certain extent, but we need help. Well, brothers and sisters, that help is going to come. And that help is going to come in the person of Elijah the prophet.
America. Can you tell us what is the driving force, what is the motivational force that's bringing these people back? What is the spirit that's driving them? Because they're coming back to a land which many people would see as being, it's a step of faith in a way to come here and to live. But I want to hear from your perspective, because you're in touch with these people, what is bringing them back?
The first answer to your question is that although it's a step of faith, it's not a step down. The land is wonderful. The people here are nice and pretty. The food is good. The beaches are wonderful. The weather is great. And you feel very fulfilled here in the land of Israel. Jewish people always feel guilty when they're not in the land of Israel. So we say, forget the guilt. Come live here. Come be part of this great thing. That's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is that, Paul, you know, as well as I, that we're living in a time where the Jewish people are returning to the land of Israel. And it's obvious from history. We're returning from all four corners of the world. After the Holocaust, we are finally returning to the land of Israel. And that prophecy which says very clearly, I will bring you back. I will bring you back to the land, is happening. Why should we second guess that prophecy? We look all around us. There are flourishing towns here. There's a prophecy that says, the hills of Judea will be filled and old people will sit on benches with their grandchildren on their laps. And I look around, and sometimes I stand in Jerusalem, I look around and I say, thank you, God.
Right.
Thank you, God. I thank you for letting me have the merit of being born at this time, that I can look and see with mine eyes that old people are sitting on benches in the mountains of Judea. It's an incredible thing. That I can look and see with mine eyes that old people are sitting on benches.
So there's somebody else that appreciates what he's seeing. We have another person that I went to see. This man lives on Mount Gerizim. His name is Jonathan Behar, and this is what he had to say to me. If I can get him up. Where are you gone? There it is. He says, we are living in the very special time of the redemption of the Jewish nation after thousands of years of exile. God is bringing the Jewish people from the four corners of the earth, like the prophets said. The Jewish people are returning to God. We are returning to the land of Israel and turning to the Torah. We are coming back physically and spiritually. We are looking forward to having Elijah the prophet. We are looking forward to the final redemption. This is what we are praying for. Whether there will be trials, we are ready in any case. I find it amazing to listen to a Jewish person telling me that. It's there. And so we have another person on Mount Gerizim. His name is Ner, and he is... I'll just give you the passage. It's Jeremiah 31 verse 5, where it talks about them putting vines on the mountains of Samaria, and that's exactly what he does. He has a vineyard on the mountains of Samaria.
The worst case that will come in Israel will be a war with the Palestinian state, or maybe with several other Arab states, because of interacting in a war crisis. If we will have our back to the wall, I guess then we'll have to open up a war. But until our back won't be to the wall, the land of Israel is not looking for wars. We know that the Russians are with the Hamas. We know that there's a lot of weapons coming in from the Gaza Strip all the time, from Egypt to the Gaza Strip, to the freed Gaza Strip. There's no United Nations over there overlooking what's happening there. Even from Hebron, I think it was on the Hamas day that they won the elections. They fled out of there, the overlooking people that were living there. The world is coming to a crisis. The Iranian are becoming nuclear weaponed. And going to a phase that they can't go back from. They're enriching their uranium. Everybody knows about it. The Iranian president, Ahmadinejad, said already several times about the land of Israel and about the Zionists and about the Holocaust. We recognize and we know Haman or Amalek when we see one. We know that. But God is in control, of course. As believers, we know that God is in control. And what we know is that the land of Israel is called Eretz Chefetz, the land that will be higher and held higher than all the other nations, than all the other lands. And if something occurs in the world around, in Israel there will be like a place, a bunker, to come and to be quiet. The opposite of what people think. That here it's like a barrel of explosives inside the Middle East. But it's really in our neighbor's land. All of our neighbors' land. The Arabs that are around us. But Israel is a peace-seeking nation. Everybody recognizes it. Everybody knows it. We have a problem of the Palestinian state, but still, we let them be Palestinian state. And if they will not act as they were supposed to act, then they will become immigrants.
This gentleman is David Rubin. He lives in Shiloh in the West Bank, and he was the ex-mayor of Shiloh, and we visited him in his home, and he had some interesting things to say, so I'll just play you a bit of his clip.
I started reading everything I could about Zionism, about Israel, and that eventually led me to the Torah and to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because it became clear to me that the land of Israel and the God of Israel and the Torah of Israel, the Bible of Israel, are inseparable.
So you read the Bible. Now tell me, you must have read those prophecies in the Bible, like by Jeremiah and so on, that talk about the people coming back to this land. Did that have any impact on you?
Oh, certainly, and I'll go a step further, that some of those prophecies and the biblical stories led me to the biblical heartland of Israel. Samaria is the biblical heartland of Israel. This is where most of the biblical places are located, Samaria together with Judea. And there was no question that this was where it needed to be, because this is where the challenge is today. We've come back here, and it says in the book of Genesis, chapter 49, verse 10, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a scholar from among his descendants, until Shiloh comes, and his will be an assemblage of nations. Now, when we talk about an assemblage of nations, we see it in the land. We know from the prophecy of Ezekiel, chapter 36, where it talks about how God is going to bring us back from the four corners of the earth into the land of Israel, and we will be sovereign again in the land of Israel, and that He will put His Spirit back in us. We know that from the book of Ezekiel, but in Genesis it says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a scholar from among his descendants, until Shiloh comes. Okay, Shiloh. Now, why does it say until Shiloh comes? What is Shiloh? What is Shiloh, or as we say in Hebrew, Shiloh? It's talking about the Messiah. The biblical commentators tell us this, that Shiloh actually means Messiah. So why is it referred to as Messiah? Because the Messiah is identified with the process of redemption for Israel and for the world. And we know that there was a woman named Hannah who came to Shiloh to pray for a son. And we know that before Hannah, Joshua set up the tabernacle in Shiloh, and it stood here for 369 years. Joshua said to the children of Israel, "How long will you wait before coming to take possession of the land that the Lord God of your fathers has given you?" Now, those words, that commandment to take control of the land, was incumbent on the Israelites of that time, and it's also incumbent on the Israelis of this time. It's also incumbent on the Jews around the world in this time, and it's incumbent on everyone who believes that God's sovereignty is on this land. And that includes Jews and non-Jews. Everyone is supposed to be active on behalf of the biblical heartland. Now, Hannah came to Shiloh, to the tabernacle, to pray for a son. In her prayers, she prayed that God will give her a son because she hadn't been successful in having children. The son who was born from those prayers was Samuel the prophet. Samuel grew up in Shiloh. He grew up into prophecy in Shiloh, and he was the one who would appoint the first two kings of Israel, Saul and David, who set up the unified kingdom in Jerusalem. David's son Solomon set up the temple in Jerusalem. And we know the rest of that history of what happened, where the temple was destroyed, then it was rebuilt later on. Eventually the Jews are scattered around the world. Well, God has brought us home now, back into the biblical heartland of Israel. In the Six-Day War in 1967, the Arab nations attacked, and we recaptured the biblical heartland. We recaptured the old city of Jerusalem. We recaptured the Golan Heights and the Sinai Desert and the Gaza region. And all this happened in 6 days. And on the seventh day we rested, because the seventh day was a Jewish Sabbath. Okay, this is a miraculous thing. Now, what Christians would call a God thing. So the fact is, that process, that chronological process of return to the biblical heartland, to Jerusalem next, is replaying itself in our times. We've come home to the biblical heartland of Israel, and the challenge is over that biblical heartland, the so-called West Bank, that the whole world says is occupied, that nobody recognizes our sovereignty over. Jerusalem, that no one recognizes our sovereignty over. And in these times too, if we want to really get control of Jerusalem, we want to rebuild the Holy Temple, and we want God's glory to be recognized throughout the world, we have to first prove that we are going to rebuild that biblical heartland of Israel that Shiloh represents in those passages. So when it says, until Shiloh comes, we're talking about the Messiah, because the Messiah obviously is the one, according to Jewish understanding, is going to be rebuilding the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, who is going to be uniting all of the nation of Israel, and is going to bring everyone closer to his Torah and to his land. So that's why Shiloh means Messiah, because the Messiah obviously is central in that process of redemption.
We believe that is the case.
Yes.
Everything that you're saying is like just echoing in my head. Everything you're saying.
Okay, but I'm giving it to you from the Jewish perspective.
I know you are, yeah.
And that's something that...
And that is thrilling. That is thrilling that the Jewish people now are seeing, or some of the Jewish people are seeing it in this light. And we just pray for that Shiloh to come.
That's right. So we need that to be... Now, obviously there are some differences between Jews and Christians,
yes,
about the Messiah question, who the Messiah will be. And all that I can tell you is this: the process remains the same. Okay, whoever the Messiah will be. Okay, Christians think that they already know who the Messiah is, and I can tell you this: if the Christians are right, then I will be standing there on God's holy mountain. Okay, so it says in the book of Isaiah, Ki beiti beit tefillah yikareh lechol ha'amim. because my house will be called the house of prayer for all of the nations. And if the Christians are right about who the Messiah is, well, I'll probably be standing there going like this, praying like a Christian and worshiping like a Christian. But I have to tell you this. If we're right about the Messiah, then you're all going to be coming to Jerusalem to pray also, but you'll be praying like this. But the fact is that we're all going to be praying. We're all going to be worshiping God's holy name, and God is going to make that clear to us. So whatever differences of theological understanding we have today, God is going to clear all that up for us. That much is clear.
Well, do you know what we find out? We find out that the God that the Christians worship, who they say is three gods and not one, we don't believe that. We believe in one God. We do not believe in what they call the Trinity. That is not part of our belief at all. We believe in one God. We believe in, I think you call it the Shema, right? The Lord our God is one Lord. Right?
That's right.
That's what we believe. And that is part of, and our belief is based upon the promises to Abraham. We are rather different to most Christians, right? Like I don't see Mr. Francis, whoever he was, who came here I don't see him as having a part of this, right? I see him as, excuse the word, an apostate, right? That's not true Christianity. That is not true. True Christianity believes in the promises to Abraham, believes in the coming of Shiloh, believes in the setting up of a kingdom in which will be a king, Messiah, and he will rule over all nations. First of all, in Israel itself, because he is the king of the Jews, we believe. And so that king will rule eventually over all nations. But there's a work to do first. And the work to do first is that you people are his battle axe and his weapons of war. And he will use you to conquer the enemies.
Well, I believe that as well.
I know you do. So there we are. So I think that gives us what we need here. That is really good. And I'm so thankful to you for allowing us the time to come and talk to you.
Well, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, okay. So you do have some friends.
Quite the character. If you want to hear him, come to Brantford later on in the month of May, and we have him visiting us as a guest speaker for a session. Well, brothers and sisters, that gives you just a view, and I've got to be fast now because, haven't I?
You can have 5.
I can have 5, he says. Oh, I can't count. This was another fellow by the name of Moshe Kempinski. He's in the Old City. And again, he's saying the same thing, really, that there's a turning towards the Bible and biblical things. So I'm going to skip on a bit, because what we have to realize is that this is all bringing an enmity between the Hebrew nation and the Vatican. That's what this is building up to. The author of this, of the book that was written some years ago now, his name was Avro Manhattan. Some of you will be familiar with the quotation. It was written in 1982. And what he said was that the scepter of the creation of such a theocracy has haunted the inner chambers of the Catholic Church from her earlier inception and is still a dominant fear. Hence her equivocal role in world affairs surrounding the birth of the existence of the State of Israel. So that author saw the development of the Hebrew nation, that it was going to be a threat to the Catholic Church. This is where we see the developing issue between Rome and Zion today, brothers and sisters. Rome sees Israel as merely a secular state, as we pointed out at the beginning. For them, their replacement theology means that there is no chosen people. And it was John the 23rd, with his Vatican Council, who introduced this idea that all people are the same. And he used an encyclical, it is Peace on Earth, to reveal that. And it answers to that passage which you know well in Revelation about the frog spirits, liberty, equality. So if you've got equality, you can't have a chosen people, because then there's no equality. So that's how they reason. So the development of a Bible-based religious Zionism in the biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria, that's the West Bank, is anathema to the Vatican. The enmity will lead, brothers and sisters, to Armageddon. And in fact, the newspaper Haaretz had this article: the Vatican Synod criticizes Israel over settlements. And that's where all the trouble is all the time. You see it happening all the time. Israel cannot use the biblical concept of a promised land or a chosen people to justify new settlements in Jerusalem or territorial claims, a Vatican Synod on the Middle East said yesterday. So the Pope and his Vatican use their considerable influence to arouse the international opposition to Israel. And this is what has been happening recently in the Israeli elections and the events round about it. Kerry, of course, is a Roman Catholic, and he spreads this to the people that he comes in contact with. And so you've got Mr. Obama today, who is opposing things on Israel. Just follow the news and you'll see that Obama is now turning against Israel. And since Netanyahu won the election, they are just getting more and more hostile. They tried every underhand political tactic possible in order to unseat that Prime Minister of Israel. But the Most High rules in the kingdoms of men. And so they couldn't bring him down. And the Hebrew settlements on the mountains of Israel remain. I think I better call it a day there, just to realize, brothers and sisters, that there are tremendous signs taking place on the mountains of Israel today. And so we will leave that there, recognizing that the events of Zechariah 14 are going to happen when he gathers all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city is going to be taken. The women ravished, and half the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. But that's when the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations, as when he fought in the day of battle. And brothers and sisters, when he comes to fight against those nations, what it says is, all the saints are with thee. So we must expect to be called away. If we are those saints, we must expect to be called away, and we will stand for Zion. We will stand for the hope of Israel, and we will help the Lord Jesus as he directs us to establish the kingdom again in Israel.